Well, I'd like to start by just saying thank you so much for spending some time to find out a little bit more about the work that Make Space for Girls are doing. We're a campaigning charity, and we're campaigning to try and make parks and similar spaces more welcoming to teenage girls. And when we started to draw together the evidence base for our campaign, one of the things that we wanted to do was to talk to teenage girls. And one of the things that we found when we talked to them was this sort of response from Lily. When we were asking her, what do you like about parks? What do you like less about parks? What do you do in parks? Her answer was very simple. Why would I go to the park? There's nothing there for me. And that's really what we're trying to change. At the moment, teenage girls are badly served by a lot of parks, and we just need to unpick why that is. And part of the problem, a big part of the problem, is that when facilities are built for teenagers, they're almost always skate park, Muga basketball court, that sort of fenced pitch area, and then a BMX track or a pump track or something for sort of wheeled sports that isn't a skate park. And what we see in practice, and I think, you would all see this when you go around your own parks, is all of these spaces are dominated by boys and young men. The only exception to that is if a pitch has been hired to be used by an all-girls team. But when they're in free play, these spaces are all dominated by boys and young men. Another thing that we often see is that this triumvirate of facilities is actually enshrined in policy documents, in play strategies, in planning councils. It's all written down. It's in black and white. And that's what means we keep perpetuating these issues. I've just pulled out a couple of areas. One, that's a local council play area audit and action plan that was done in 2020, so relatively recent. And what they say their ambition is, our aim is to provide activity zones for young adults of 12 plus years in all the major settlements, e.g. Muga, skate park, BMX track, etc. And they're using the phrase young adults, but what they're not recognising is those are all facilities that, if they are installed, will be dominated by boys and young men. They won't serve young adults of 12 plus. And another one, this is a more nationwide one, and I'm sure a number of you will have come across the Fields in Trust guidance, which is called Beyond the 6 Hectare Standard. And this is a standard that's used for deciding, how much space needs to be allocated for sports and physical activity. And they talk about leaps and neeps, these smaller play areas. But then they say these play areas can be complemented by other facilities, including multi-use games areas and skate parks, etc. And what we see time and time again is, because this particular set of guidance is adopted by councils and is used by developers, that there's immediate default to the Muga and skate park. And we've even heard examples of a developer saying to a council, no, the Fields and Trust guidance says you get a Muga or a skate park, so we're going to give you one of those. So these baked in provisions in our guidance can be a real issue for trying to make space more inclusive. Let's just look at those two in a little bit more detail and think about some of the data. Skate parks, this data is from Skateboard GB, which is our national governing body on skateboarding. 85% of skateboarders are male and 80% of them are under 18. So that's a lot of missing teenage girls there. And what the research shows us is that boys often drive girls away from the skate park through exclusion and harassment. Now, pausing there, when we talk sometimes, people say, oh, but I go to the skate park with my 9-year-old. And when I go, it's really nice. Everybody's really helpful. Everybody's really inclusive, and there's no bad language at all. So how do we square these two visions? Are they completely different skate parks? No, they're not. But what we are seeing is that adults are a great enforcer of equality and fairness and better behaviour. And in the same way that a lot of the sexual harassment that goes on in school doesn't occur in front of the teachers, the behaviour that leads boys to drive girls away from the skate park doesn't occur in front of the parents. And that's something that we need to sort of just keep in mind. There's been some quite interesting research in the US where they put activity trackers on teenagers, and they found that living near a park makes it more likely that a teenage girl will do exercise, which is fantastic because that's what we all want to happen. But actually, living near a skate park lowered the amount of exercise taken because it was deterring the girls from going into that space. Multi-use games areas, hard surface play areas, they are used more by boys than girls. There's very little data that's been collected about Moogers, but we did a park survey, a very nice multi-use games area down in the southwest, and we observed 60 people using that Mooger over the course of a fine spring weekend. Of those 60, 3 were girls. There were no women, they were all girls. So, a very low percentage of use by girls. There's data that shows the girls play much more actively in a playground that doesn't have this sort of hard surface. And these surfaces are very open to territorialization. They're prescriptive, they're fenced, they can have single entrances, and they often don't feel safe to girls, but also to quite a lot of boys. Why does any of this matter? You could say we've had Moogers and skate parks for years. Some people like them, some people don't. Does it really matter? And we say, yes, it does matter. There's a basic principle of fairness. Why shouldn't girls have facilities in parks that are designed to meet their needs? And then there's health. We all know what inactivity does to people's physical and mental health and the amazing role that being in parks can play, particularly for populations where the park may be their main access to green space and nature. Safety. Safety is really important, and we believe that teenage girls should grow up believing they have a right to feel safe when they go outdoors, that they shouldn't grow up thinking, well, I shouldn't go outside because it's not supposed to be safe for me, so I should police my own behaviour and stay inside. We think that's wrong. And then finally, there's the law. There's Article 31 of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, and that enshrines the right to play for all children and young people up to the age of 18. So it really includes teenagers. And this is something that I think is missing from a lot of council play consideration. The lot of play provision kind of stops at 10, 12, maybe 14. But actually, we should be recognising the need to play for all teenagers. And then there's a public sector equality duty, which I'm going to come on to in a couple of slides. But that's an important legal obligation for local authorities and for councils. Now, this slide gives us a bit of data, and I apologise because it's quite a dense slide. But actually, I think that's important because the weight of evidence behind building the case that we need to change is really significant. The evidence is absolutely there. A research led by young women in Glasgow in the summer of 2021, so when we were all really appreciating parks because of lockdown, only 20% of women and girls who used parks felt comfortable in their chosen park. So this isn't 20% of all women felt comfortable. This is 20% of women who are using parks, and this isn't in all parks. This is in the park that they've chosen to use. And despite that, there's only 20% of them who feel very comfortable in their chosen park. I think there's also a really interesting point around the gap between what experts think and what users perceive. And there's been some recent research by Leeds University, which shows that 89% of park professionals think that the parks in their area were very safe or fairly safe for women and girls. So sort of 90% of park professionals. Same question asked of teenage girls, only 22% of girls felt the same. There's a huge gap there, and we need to try and understand that, I think, because only if we understand it can we try and address it so that we get to the stage where 90% of girls think their parks are very or fairly safe. That would be amazing. Rowntree Park in York, a very wonderful park. 90% of girls who are into skating, aged 10 to 17, felt uncomfortable on their local skate park. And this feels like, Yeah, such an awful thing, because these aren't girls who don't want to skate. These are girls who are into skating. They want to skate, but they don't feel comfortable on their local skate park. And then finally, there's been some wonderful research done by Women in Sport and Yorkshire Sport that was published in the summer of 2022. And they surveyed nearly 400 boys and girls to find out about the barriers that they face to park use. And we found that 68% of girls were like Lily. They said there's nothing for us to do there. Lily was not in any sort of minority. And 50% of them said there's literally no sporting activity for us to do in the park at all. There's a really interesting gap between whether boys and girls feel safe to exercise in the parks. 26% of boys don't feel safe, and that's bad. You know, boys should feel safe in the park, but it jumps to 49% of girls not feeling safe to exercise in the park. So we've got to address this. And then finally, 59% of girls said they didn't feel welcome in the park because the spaces in the park are dominated by boys. And this is what girls are telling us in the summer of 2022. So what do teenagers want? Because teenagers are very happy to talk not just about what's not working, but what would they like? And they were asked, the same 400 were asked, what would make you more active in the park? And the bar chart here shows their responses to this. And what we can see is that swings, trampolines, play equipment, wanting to be playful, ranked very highly for the teenage girls. Now, I don't think anybody was particularly surprised that skate parks and Mugas didn't go so well for the girls. But I think what a lot of people were quite surprised by was that they didn't actually rate very highly with the boys either. You know, we can see the multi-use games area, 39% of boys. So a substantial minority, but still a minority. Skate park, 31%. The only thing that was less popular than the skate park was a music and dance space, which is kind of, you know, quite an unusual and unexpected, I think, result. I mentioned the public sector equality duty. Public sector equality duty requires public authorities, local councils, when they're making decisions, to proactively consider three things. They need to consider how to eliminate unlawful discrimination. They need to consider how to advance equality between the advantaged and disadvantaged groups. And they need to consider how to foster good relations between advantaged and disadvantaged groups. And what we can see from the data that we've just looked at is that teenage girls are currently disadvantaged when it comes to the provision for teens in parks. And what the public sector equality duty does is it imposes a legal obligation on public authorities to proactively consider how they're going to address this. So I just want to finish by a few words about, well, what might change look like? And I think what we'd emphasize is that this is about the need to create parks that work better for teenage girls, non-binary young people, and the boys who don't use Mugas, skate parks, and BMX tracks. It's not about painting things pink, and it's not about separating boys and girls. And it's not about getting rid of Mugas, skate parks, or BMX tracks. But what it is about, it's about creating spaces that work more inclusively for all of our young people. We need to think about these spaces differently, not to reach for the provision that says, well, something for our 12+ young adults, it's a Muga, it's a skate park, it's a BMX track. We've got to think differently about this. I think it's really important that we engage with girls and other minoritized genders to understand the barriers that they face and what would make things better for them. I think it's about giving support to people to do things differently, because that's kind of scary. You know, it's very easy to pull the thing out of the catalogue, to do the thing that everybody else has done, to put in the Muga, to put in the skate park. It's been done before. You kind of know what the outcome's going to be. Doing something different, people need support to do that. And I suppose I'd finish just by saying that if we can make these spaces more inclusive, we'll really be driving and generating social value for our parks, because we'll be making them better places for the whole community. So on that note, I will finish.
Great, thank you. That was really interesting, and I hope it was informative for lots of us here. It certainly was for me. So at this point, I'll open it up to a discussion. I think maybe people who've got questions, just raise your hands, and then obviously I can see you, Pat, don't worry. If you have a question, then feel free for friends groups you can join into if you have experience that might help as well. So the questions don't necessarily have to be all directed at Imogen, but I'm sure obviously be really helpful to hear what she has to say as well. So Pat, over to you.
That was excellent. Thank you very much. My question, I have two questions actually. Do councils actually understand this? And what have you seen that's been successful? What kinds of things have been successful? Thank you.
I think the thing is that a council, as you all know, is not a single thing. It is many, many different things. And my phone down. There are lots of people in councils who completely understand it, and there are lots of people in councils who don't understand it. And I think that it's really just a question of making sure that the word is spread as widely as we can. And one of the things that we say to councils is, look, if you want to make your parks more inclusive, and that's part of what you want to do, for goodness sake, tell your local friends of groups. Don't hide it under a bushel. Don't pretend you're not doing it. You know, be out there and be, you know, open about what you're trying to do, and talk to your local friends of parks groups about it, because they're the people on the ground. They're the people with the connections to the community. So yes, some people in councils do know. No, other people in councils don't know. But, you know, as more we can spread the word, and I say the more that we can make councils realise that it's a big effort. It's not going to be like a magic wand that one person waves and suddenly it's all fixed. It's a big communal effort to change this. Second part of the question, what have we seen that works? There are lots of case studies on our website, most of which sadly are from Europe. There really hasn't been very much work done in the UK. There are a couple of parks that are going in Bradford, hopefully in the spring of this year, that have been co-designed with young girls looking at what would be commonly seen as a bit of a green desert in their local area. And it'll be really interesting to see how those are activated and how we can create a sense of ownership and belonging for those girls who are part of the process.
Great, thank you. Anna from Grove Farm, I think you're next.
Thank you. Hi, Imogen. Thank you very much. It was a really interesting presentation. It's great to see all the data there as well. I was just wondering, what's the best way, what kind of advice do you have for trying to engage with your local teenagers and local teenage girls? We're quite a new friends group. We've only been around a year, and we find that most of the people that we manage to engage with are much older, or they might be parents with young kids, but we're finding it quite difficult to engage with teenagers. So advice from you and advice from anyone else who's had success with engaging would be really helpful, because we'd love to bring more teenagers into our nature reserve and help them to feel like it's theirs and they belong.
I mean, I think working with secondary schools, if you have secondary schools where the school children use the parks, so you know, we worked with a secondary school where the park was kind of on the way home, so the secondary school girls were always through the park but not stopping in the park. So it's that conversation about what would make you kind of spend a bit more time here. And so secondary schools are really good. We just did a workshop up in Edgware where we had a fantastic time with a group of girls from a local theatre group who were, you know, wonderful and articulate with their views about their local spaces. Theatre groups, guides, and of course Scouts is now mixed and has boys and girls, so that's a great way. So I think the answer is go to where the girls are going to be rather than trying to get the girls to come to you. And I think the other bit of learning that I think we found this in common with others, actually online, you would think that engaging with teenage girls online would be really easy because they are digital natives, but actually you get really quite low take up from online work. It's just not a mode of engagement that seems to work. And as I say, a lot of us who are doing this are slightly surprised, but we have to accept what we're seeing, that it doesn't seem to be a thing that works for teenage girls.
I remember reading in one of your reports as well, Imogen, I think that you cited an example, or maybe it was when we met, an example of going to the DT class and asking the girls there to actually design their ideal park. And I thought that was a really interesting way of going about it too, sort of turning it into a school lesson. I thought that was a really creative approach. Kim.
Hi, Imogen. You know, in Broomfield Park that we have a group apart from the Friends who are looking to develop a skate park with the council, and we've also we have funding and ideas about creating space for girls within the park. Do you have any ideas about if the skate park is going ahead, whether our focus would be best spent on developing areas around the park, or actually attached to the skate park, to make it more acceptable and more approachable for girls, or whether we should be looking at other areas of the park and sort of doing a completely separate thing? Is there any sort of integrated model that you're aware of that might guide us in that?
And I think there are things that can be done to a skate park that can make it more accessible to beginners and to less confident skaters. But I think the sort of deterrent effect that occurs round a skate park is such that, you know, if you're wanting to put a teen space that you want girls and the sorts of boys and non-binary young people who aren't attracted to the skate park, I would put it somewhere else. I mean, we heard from a council down just on the south coast, and they had almost no money, but they engaged with their local girls to say, what would help you use the park more? And they said, could you give us an entrance that's not near the skate park, please? Because we don't want to walk past the skate park because we just get hassle. And there was some work done in Oxford where one of the girls just said, just take the skate park out. I hate it. The boys just yell stuff at me. You know, so I think we have to work with the world that we have, and the world that we have currently is that large groups of boys on a skate park will tend to act in a way that makes girls want to avoid that space. So I think if you are thinking, right, we want to go ahead with the skate park, okay, if that's the right decision, but if you also want to make a space that's better for other teenagers, I would have it somewhere else with different access points. So that's just my thinking.
Thank you.
Chris Norris.
Hi, thank you. I mean, it's been really good to hear from you, actually. We're going through a lot of potential change in terms of our play and sports facilities in Ruskin Park. So it's really, and I've been following you on Twitter and reading your website for quite a while. So it's good to actually to hear from you as well. There were two things. Firstly, it's kind of a similar point actually, but about Muga sort of spaces actually, because you know we are going to have some kind of new multi-use games areas as part of in the park, hopefully as well as some other spaces. But I suppose it would be interesting to think how they can be designed to sort of not fall into the kind of common traps. And I've already heard a few things like I think like multiple different entrances maybe, and I suppose also what sports are marked out as well is important. And the second thing was a point of sort of reflection because we've just been going through at the moment a process of the council sort of renewing the playground in the park. And one of the interesting things was that the way the kind of procurement was run was that the design was kind of done by different suppliers of playground equipment. So they would kind of win the tender based on them submitting a kind of whole design for the playground. And I wondered whether you'd kind of spoken to the kind of big playground manufacturers and whether there was any sort of merit in trying to kind of influence their kind of in-house designers to be more aware of these things, because we've kind of then gone back and forth and raised some of these issues. And interestingly, you know, first thing they want to do is get rid of the trampoline because it's always breaking, for example, but you know, we know that's popular with girls. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
I think on the multi-use games area, I think taking down fences so they're not enclosed, and I think dividing up areas, because a single space can be taken over by a single group and will be dominated by that group. And if you divide the area up into smaller areas, you can have several groups. And I think recognizing that a lot of what young people, young men do on a multi-use games area is playing. It's not sport. They're not using the offside rule. They're playing with a ball. They're pretending to score the winning goal in the FA Cup final. They're playing. So when we insist on having everything marked out, actually, do we really need everything marked out? You know, can we make it less prescriptive? So taking down fences, dividing up areas, making it less prescriptive. These are all things that can help to take a tarmacked area and make it something that more people are able to use. You know, if it's a flat tarmacked area that's divided into smaller fences, one group could be practicing their roller skating on it, whilst another group are playing with a ball. Think about that sort of thing. And then in terms of the big playground equipment manufacturers, absolutely, you know, we are talking to them. What we're saying to them, and I think it is absolutely right, look, this is a marketing opportunity for you. If you can get this right, if you can be the people who can demonstrate that you've got the ability to create more inclusive spaces, this is your competitive edge. Why would you not want to do that? And I think in principle, people are very interested, but some of the feedback we get is around the tender process and the fact that actually when they get a tender out for a council, it basically says, we want a Muga put in this place with 4.5 metre high fences, with this sort of surface, with this sort of entrance and exit, with this sort of lighting scheme. And they can look at it and they can go, well, we know this space is just going to be used by boys and young men. Absolutely, classic Muga. But all we can do as the manufacturer is respond to the tender. You know, we're not allowed to try and change the tender. Public procurement policy stops us doing that. So I think it's on both sides. I think there needs to be bravery from the councils to say, actually, let's ask for something different. Let's see what people come up with. And then hopefully that will generate a demand from the play manufacturers who will, you know, I was talking to SAPCA, which are the people who, it's the trade body for the people who install, you know, play zones, you know, the pitches, the courts. And they're very up for doing things differently. It's more interesting, it's more exciting, it's facing a challenge. Many of them have daughters, many of them have granddaughters. You know, it's not necessarily that people are going, oh no, I don't fancy doing that. I think it's a question of just people coming together and having those conversations and doing tenders differently.
Thank you very much.
Roger from Newham.
Okay, thank you. It was an excellent presentation and thank you very much. And I think the conversation since has been very, very interesting. in terms of spreading the gospel, if you like, will it be possible to have access to the presentation you use, so we can use it to push the points that you've already made in there to local parks, and try and start in particularly West Ham Park, where I'm based, and start a conversation about it? And secondly, I was intrigued by your comment about how to make progress. Involving local schools. There are a number of schools that surround West Ham Park. And one of the things that we have been unable to do is engage with teenagers. It's all the points you said. But one of those schools has now started that process, and we're starting process with them of engaging with that age group who want to come support us, do some work in the park, do some volunteering, and so on. So starting that conversation with them, and then perhaps as we get their confidence a bit, building it into a discussion around all the points you've just made, would, I think, be really, really helpful, because it will help us give the park management pointers as to what they should, or more importantly, should not do. So that's certainly my view from West Ham Park. If we could have a presentation, that would be great. And maybe at a point in the future we can sort of feedback some of the results of our engagement exercises.
I mean, what would be amazing on the presentation is if it's possible to sort of edit the presentation, this recording, if it's possible to edit this recording so that it's just the presentation, rather than, because we've recorded the whole thing, and I think, but I shall look to Laura and any other technical geniuses to know whether it is possible to edit a Zoom presentation. If not, we are intending to relaunch our website, and there will be a version of this presentation as a short video on our website, along with a written version for those people who prefer to take information in just by having a quick look at a PDF rather than listening to a 10-minute chat. So yes, we're very conscious of wanting to get the message out, and great news about engaging with your local schools. It is a slow process, and it can be desperately frustrating because teenagers have so many demands on their time. And I think turning it into something where they can see what's in it for them. And I think that if you've got a budget and you've got a space and you're asking young people to get involved in a co-production process, that will lead to something being installed within a time frame that makes sense for them. That's a very much easier sell than, we just want to talk to you generally. We just like to get your ideas. We don't really have a budget. We don't really know where we're going to be able to do anything, but would you mind giving us your views anyway? That, I think, is much harder for teenagers to kind of get their heads around. It's about, well, why? I mean, the other option, the other thing is if there is funding, a lot of good practice says that you actually pay people for their time where they're engaging in a process that will add value, but obviously that's a money issue. And pizza, I suppose I would say, pizza and yum yums are very, very good. I'm putting on a considerable amount of weight as a result of doing consultations because of the amount of pizza and yum yums that I'm going through. But it's making something that people can see is worth their while. Obviously, if you're actually going into school and doing it in a school lesson, you've kind of slightly got a captive audience there because they've got to do the school lesson. So they, if this is slightly more fun than the ordinary lesson, it's a win for them. But I think seeing what's in it for them is important.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
I'm going to say I definitely do not have the skills to edit a video. So if anyone does, please put a note in the chat with your email address. And otherwise, we'll have to wait till the new website, I'm afraid. Anna Burke.
Hi, Imogen, thank you so much for that that presentation. It was really interesting and it made me think about a lot of things I haven't thought about before. Here in Manor Park, we have a slight barrier in a sense that we are maybe 5 meters away from a boys' school with 1,000 boys in it and no girls, obviously, and they're pretty well behaved, but they certainly, as we're a small park, they completely dominate the area and the swings and everything else. So that is slightly an issue. There has also been some quite problematic things that have happened to young girls, not to do with this school or these boys, I have to say. So it's something I'm very concerned about. But what I would like to know really is, you know, if there was one thing that you'd like us friends groups to do, what would it be?
Put in some swings and some social seating somewhere where you have a decent bit of sort of natural surveillance, and make it clear that that's where, you know, you're happy for girls to be. Because what will happen quite a lot is girls will kind of encroach on the little kids' play area. Because there isn't really anything for them, and so they encroach onto the little kids area and then they get tutted out and disapproved of by the parents because they shouldn't be on that stuff, and then they sort of, you know, feel, you know, pushed out again. So I suppose if you've got the money, you know, using it to provide sociable seating and big swings.
That's interesting because there is actually some money for social seating, but it's how to make that accessible. As I say, the boys dominate the swings. I don't think it's intentional, but obviously there's an awful lot of them. And what I have noticed is that girls, particularly that sort of 12-year-old age group, they seem to really like the disabled friendly equipment, which is exciting. But they seem to love that. Don't throw disabled children off it or anything. But I just noticed that today, strangely enough, it been, and I watched for a while and I thought, yes, the girls seem to like it, the big chairs and things, you know. Just an anecdotal thing. But that seating thing is very interesting.
Yes, I think it's interesting what you know, I think they're quite keen, teenage girls often, to carve out a new space for themselves, if they can find somewhere that is suitable. And I think the location side is really important as well. We were talking to girls down in the southwest, Richmond, and actually it was Kingston, not Richmond, apologies. And they are incredibly well served because they've got Bushy Park, they've got Richmond Park, they've got all these amazing parks. And they had all carved out little bits where they would go. And they knew where they would go. And their biggest fear was that something might be put in those places that might attract other people and they would lose that space. So they were very kind of, no, we know where we go. We like our places where we go. Please don't put anything in it.
I'm going to tell you where they are.
Yeah, we're not going to, because if good stuff gets put in it, other people, open brackets, boys, close brackets, will come and take over. So, but I mean, that was, you know, teenage girls who, you know, I mean, that part of Kingston is so amazingly, you know, the parks that they've got are so extraordinary and so extensive and so well served that it sort of feels a bit like, well, yes, if everybody could live within walking distance of a park like the Royal Richmond Park and Bushy Park, life would be amazing, but actually life's not like that, and we have to deal with the fact that most people have rather different park spaces to use.
Thank you.
Thank you. Art?
Hi, yeah. Thank you very much, Imogen, for the statistics and the data. As a landscape architect, this is absolutely brilliant for me because I can now take those numbers and throw them back at clients, as well as applying it to my own, you know, friends groups experience. So that data is absolute gold dust. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to put a couple of thoughts to you, and I think some of them really you've probably already just beaten me to. The first one is seating and the value of seating, and discrete little areas, so that you don't just have a seating area next to the Muga, but you can have a seating area next to the Muga. And then you also have one which is away, and you also have one which is near to the entrance, and you also have one which is away from the entrance. So it's that diversity of different seating opportunities.
Yeah.
And that not all seating opportunities have to be benches, that they can be walls, or they can be boulders, they can be just about anything, patch of lawn. And these tend to be the sorts of places in my design experience which will attract people who are less dominant, I suppose, in a sort of macho scenario, I suppose. The other thought is that there are little cues that you can give if you've got an area which is very male dominant, so male dominated that there are not enough female opportunities. You can actually leave cues in a particular area which are just emasculating, to use a sort of brutal word. You can make the space feel more feminine, and that males will then tend not to use it because this is why girls will use play spaces that are designed for younger children, is because the boys think, oh, I'm not going to go around the little kids play area, I'm too big for that. So there are ways that you can play their macho attitude to advantage in order to shape out, scope out places for girls and for boys who are not so competitive, should we say. But just wondering if you've got any good examples of that we, again, I can quote back to people.
I think the value of seating is really important. A lot of the stats that I quoted were from work that's been done by active partnerships who are their charitable mission is about sports and physical activity. So all their questions, all their research is around what would help you to be more active, which is why the stats don't talk about seating. But actually the value of having sociable spaces where people can sit and meet in the parks is incredibly important. And there's been some really interesting work that was done up in Brent with young women there. And one of the things that was expressed there was, I just sometimes want to go to the park to be on my own, to have space to sit, to read, to look at my laptop, to just be. And recognizing that some young people do have their own bedrooms, they do have their own space at home, but there are plenty of young people who don't have that. And for those people, having bits of the public realm where they can just go and be quiet and be safe and be alone is incredibly valuable to their mental health and their sense of well-being. And the value of seating and having different areas where women and girls feel they can go and be is incredibly important. And on your point about the cues, CUESs, I was thinking you meant QUEUSs, I was going, cues? No, the cues for females to be somewhere. Again, yes, it's incredibly valuable. On our website, we've got an example of a place in Umeå in Sweden, where they designed a sort of very varied seating area. You've got some swing seats, you've got some bench seats, it's all sorts of different areas. But the scale was actually sort of built around the average dimensions of a teenage girl. Whereas, as we know in the normal world, dimensions are based on the average adult male most of the time. And so the simple act of designing seating that's the right size and kind of scramblable into by teenage girls, but which a bigger chap just isn't going to be able to kind of access. And they used a lot of clever lighting, pinks and golds, sending out all those cues to make it feel like a place that was welcoming to girls and not the sort of place where the slightly more macho boy or man would necessarily want to be. And a very extreme example is there's a place in, again, it's somewhere in Sweden, where was saying they felt very uncomfortable on this particular street junction, very dominated by boys hanging around, loitering, but it was on a thoroughfare, so the girls were like, we really don't feel comfortable. So the local authority installed a huge set of bright pink steps. They were really quite big, that you could sit on, like a set of pyramidal steps with empowering female slogans on them, which remarkably stopped those boys from hanging around in that area, because they didn't want to be hanging around a set of pink steps with girl power slogans on them. Didn't fit their image. So you know, it's really fascinating the
Sorry,
sort of things can happen.
where is that?
I don't know. If you look at, it's in Sweden, and if you look at the Mayor's Design Advocates, the Mayor of London's Design Advocates have just issued some guidance, which includes these marvellous steps. And if I have a moment, I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat, because it is amazing. I haven't lost everybody, have I? No, I had a sudden panic there. I was like, oh, everyone's disappeared.
Thanks. I think that's really interesting, because I know in my park, for example, they're very reluctant to put in new benches. But if we were able to get them to think a bit more creatively about, you know, what constitutes a seating area, maybe it's boulders or logs or something like this, maybe they'd be more amenable. iPad, which I think it's Elizabeth, isn't it?
Thank you. Yeah, I just managed to get on recently. Thank you, Imogen. It's really given us food for thought. We have a very big Muga, and we're desperately trying to engage with girls. But what we do have, which is really successful, which is your talk made me think, was we have a lovely swing park, which was designed using one in New York, with our Heritage Lottery Fund, which is now 8 years old. And I see the girls in it all the time. There's a basket swing, and they often swing in it, and they swing on all the others as well. It's very much a seating area around it, walls, you know, that they can sit on. But what they do is, sometimes I see them in the summer using it on their way to school. You mentioned that, Imogen, about them, you know, going to school and stopping off. And so I could really recommend swings for them. It does encourage them, and they love the basket swing, which is kind of more or less their size, really.
Great, thank you.
And sorry, which park is that?
It's Alexandra Road Park, Camden. And we restored our little 4.5 acre park. It's in the middle of an estate. We restored it 8 years ago now, 2015, it was finished with a Heritage Lottery Fund money. And it has been very successful, although the vegetation has gone a bit crazy recently.
Oh, I mean, I'd love to see some pictures if you have any.
Oh,
pictures.
Yeah, well, we've got lots from when it was, you know, from the restoration. Yeah,
I'd love to see.
Yeah, the other thing we do have is, because we ran out of money, we have an area which hasn't got anything in it but just markings, and they also use that as well. That's quite, somebody mentioned having an area that actually isn't allocated for anything, and that's very popular too. Whereas the Muga, which is massive, is totally dominated by boys all the time, and parents of girls do complain about that. Don't blame them.
And what, I mean, when you say they can do, is it that they want the girls to be able to use the Muga?
Yes,
is it
yes,
that,
they do.
They
Yes.
do, but the girls just can't get on it.
Yeah, they can't get on it, and you know, if there's any sort of trouble, obviously the parents are really, really worried about that. And we have a very active TRA. Sorry. Sorry about that. It has to happen, doesn't it? Yeah, we have an active TRA, and so we get lots of feedback. And we've had some recently about girls not being able to go on the Muga. You know, there's just so many boys, you know, they just come in from everywhere and hog it, really. We just had it resurfaced as well.
I think one of the things that's really interesting is how we change attitudes to the ownership of that space as well, because I was working with, we were talking to some people up in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
was a park professional, and he said, I've got this great idea. One day a week, say every Wednesday, I'm going to increase the presence of women in the park. I've got some park rangers. I said, wow, you've got some park rangers? He said, yes, I've got some women park rangers. I'm going to bring them into the park.
That's a good idea.
Go out onto social media to say, this is, you know, this is your girls welcome after school, these 2 hours, we're going to make a super effort. I said, look, this is sounding fantastic. What happens if on Women's Wednesday, or whatever catch name you come up with, a group of girls turn up, football under the arm, they want to go on the Mooga, but there are boys there?
Yeah.
Do you ask the boys to move over and give the girls the Mooga for part of that single 2-hour session one day every week? And his answer was no, I wouldn't do that. I would try and persuade the boys to share the space with the girls. So what he's doing is, I am by that act telling the boys that this is their space and they have the right to choose whether or not the girls can come on this space. And I'm giving the girls exactly the same message, that whether or not they are allowed to use that space is dictated by their male peers. And that was the message that he said was how he would solve the problem. And he couldn't see that there was a difficulty with this. And I think it just shows how, and he was a really nice guy, and he was really definitely trying to come up with really good ideas. But this idea that the boys have the ownership of this space is so deeply ingrained in us, that the idea that we would actually say, no, let's take it away from the boys for a little bit.
Yes.
I was talking to a teacher, a headmaster who'd done one of these experiments where he had said the Mooga in his playground was for the girls on a Thursday. Much moaning from the boys about how dare the school take away football on a Thursday. This was outrageous. It was their space. And the head, to his credit, turned around and said, fine, I could take it away 5 days a week if you want.
Yeah.
But it was, it needed that kind of, you know.
Yeah, that persistent. Yes. Well, we are actually, we've got the Football Association came to see me today, actually, because I look out onto the Mooga. And we are going to have sessions for girls. But you're right, it's just embedded, like you say, that it is for boys. But I don't know, we've got some pretty sassy girls around, so I think the future is looking good. Thank you.
I hope so.
Great, thanks. Anna from Grove Farm.
Hi there, it's been a really interesting conversation about the importance of seating and things like that. Our park has some, well, it's a nature reserve, and we have problems in that it's not overlooked at all, so it's quite, we have problems with safety, and women don't want to walk there. Unfortunately, 20 years ago, a woman was killed in the park. And we currently have quite a few antisocial drinkers, and we're trying to deal with these things with various things like making more sight lines so it's more visible from paths and things like that. I don't think we can persuade the council to put any benches in yet or seating, because they just say it attracts the drinkers. But are there things that we could do, or sort of activities like this idea of sort of you know, things that could attract teenage girls into the park? Yeah, what can we do in our case, given all of our kind of constraints to reclaim the space?
I do think I think people feeling that they have a sense of ownership and they've got a little bit invested in a space is really helpful. So, you know, you could even look at things like, you know, litter picking. With girls, you know, as part of saying, look, this is something that you can contribute to. I was listening to a really inspiring talk by a young woman. She was 16, and she said, look, don't underestimate, you know, how we are interested in doing things. Yes, of course, we'd love to be involved in the kind of design and build of the big stuff and maybe use some power tools, and that would be really cool. And we'd really like to do that. But we also want to be involved in the planting. We also want to be involved in caring for this. Don't open brackets, as long as it's not early in the morning, close brackets, to be absolutely clear. I mean, just don't organize it. I mean, somebody was saying they'd organized a teen park run at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and very few teenagers turned up, and it's a bit like, yeah. But I think getting, seeing if teenagers want to become involved in helping shape a place. I think, and once you have a sense of, I've invested a little bit of me in this space, I'm kind of proud of it, and I kind of quite like to see it doing well. That sort of thing, I think, can be helpful. But the issues of safety in very natural spaces is incredibly difficult. And we were talking to a woman in Portsmouth who was trying to get teenage girls engaged with nature through doing things that were more fun than biology homework, but a bit like that. But all the feedback they were getting from the girls was, I'm not going out there on my own. It's not safe. Now, that may be a perception thing, but it's still something we have to get over.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Sorry,
if I can just
Oh.
say one or two quick things, really. One
Yeah, of course.
is that it's been really interesting last summer when the Old English Garden was replanted in Victoria Park, and made quite a lot more open, but in sections. And particularly young Bangladeshi women have been using it and made it into a space they feel comfortable by being there. And that's been lovely. On the other side of that, the park decided to put fences around the playground last year, or maybe the year before now, actually, because of the fear of children running off into the park and parents watching their phones rather than their children. And that has kind of shut that space down. And on the other side, they put a fence around the skate park. So you've got the boys on one side of the hub and the girls on the other.
Mm.
And I just want to take all the fences down, but it won't be allowed, because it seems that the public get their councillors to ask for fences. That was just the observations from Vicky Park, really.
And I do remember the furore, because when you first put that play area in, it wasn't fenced, and I thought that was lovely. But I remember the
we got a fence around the small children's playground. That was around the V&A playground, and the Friends group campaigned for that, and we got it. It was our first victory. But the bigger playground in the East Park worked quite happily unfenced. But there's been a great deal of anxiety from parents about children running off, and dogs. So it is now fenced, and that's not going to go back.
No. Yeah.
But the Old English Garden is lovely, and it's lovely to see girls using it, and it's become a kind of space that's safe for girls.
And I think that's great. I think that's I think the wonderful thing about the big parks, Victoria Park, the big royal parks, is they sort of have space for lots and lots of different people. And I think that's what's so fantastic about it. It's sometimes smaller parks, the ones that don't have as much space, where we tend to fall into a slightly kind of, let's stick a mooger in. I mean, I live near a park called Rosemary Gardens, and they've redone the pitches there, the fence pitches there, and they're amazing fence pitches. They're brilliant, but they're attracting, teams of young men from outside the borough. They're very well used. They're bookable, and it's become a really male park, which it didn't used to be. I've lived here quite a few, and it never used. It was, it was a bit tatty around the edges, but it wasn't. Whereas now, it feels like a very, because the boys are all either on the pitch or they're coming to meet their mates after a game. And yeah, it's, so I can see the pitches are an amazing facility, but I can also see the other side, which is it's made it a kind of place where teenage girls are a bit like, nah, don't go there. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for all your questions. And I think from looking at the notes in the chat, I think everyone's really appreciated your presentation and your comments in the discussion, Imogen. So thank you very much for joining us today.